Ally, thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course, you are the next generation guru, so I appreciate you sitting down with me and allowing me to contribute to your
Oh,
next gen
well,
report.
so excited to have the Gen Z guru involved in the report this time. This was a lot of fun. I obviously collaborated with you and Blake and a couple others in looking at the questions we were asking for the follow-up survey on Gen Z, and just really how we were framing it. And what's cool about talking with you is that you have a lifestyle brand that you've built on Instagram and kind of new to the mortgage industry. So I think your perspective is really fresh and interesting. And you're doing a bunch of Gen Z interviews. So really
Yes.
excited to talk with you.
Yeah, and I think I'm really excited to talk with you because where I've kind of jumped in from a personal curiosity after sitting through these conferences, I've been like, well, I'm having these conversations. Let me see if I can document them in a way that is not too expensive for me, but also I'm really curious. How can I bring these to the table without my friends being like, what are you doing? So through my surveys, I really have only been able to reach, maybe some people who live similar lifestyles to me. But with your reports, you reach so many underserved communities and maybe demographics that I don't really get to touch. So I was excited to compare and just see, what supports what I've been doing and what may differ. So really excited for the conversation too.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of value in obviously different approaches to research. And when I first got started in the industry, I was doing millennial interviews, and so it's really fun. But I think that the value you get from that is obviously much more qualitative. Like you get in depth with what they're thinking and feeling, and I think that can inform a lot of future data that we gather, hopefully together. So.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know from you what you thought was most surprising in the results we found in the report, or if
Yeah,
there's
so
anything that stood out.
I know when we first sat down, you had mentioned that a lot that there was a little bit more pessimism when it came to homeownership and really the generational wealth that came from it. And I know after looking at your millennial reports and doing some independent research, through some of the different mortgage websites, I realized a lot of millennials, they graduated in 2008 and they were a little bit more pessimistic about buying a home, especially in regards to getting financially ahead. They may have had an emotional attachment to it, but um as I've sparked my surveys, and I don't remember the exact percentage that you had when it came to being financially optimistic about homeownership, but when I did my survey, I had sent it out to it ranged, I don't know that week how many respondents I got, but it was between 150 and 200 individuals who responded. And I had said, do you believe that homeownership builds generational wealth? And I think it was 97, maybe 99% had said yes. So I don't remember the exact percentage, but it was 1 to 3% that had said no. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. I support this. I've grown up always feeling like that is going to get me ahead. And a lot of the interviews that I'm doing, like the one I've done 8 so far, and 4 have been homeowners, and they've all been like, oh, I'm mainly doing this for the financial wealth. And so when I saw in your report that it's kind of a hesitation, I could attribute it to, you're reaching other demographics. I'm really talking to people who are in similar shoes than me, Florida, Nashville, Texas, some of the big states, but not really reaching the demographics that may not have generational education. So I think that was my biggest takeaway, because then from asking, do you believe that it builds generational wealth? I said, a high percentage said yes. And then 72% want to own within the next 5 years. And so I think that your research had supported, sooner rather than later, but really the financial readiness and just kind of the wealth that they believed came from it. I was so surprised because we're not, and I don't know, maybe 2023 is going to be a pessimistic year looking back, but 2008, I remember being 10 and just being like, wow, I don't feel the same negativity, I guess, at my age level. Versus in 2008, even at 10, we were at the I don't know. I just remember being so scarce on money. And I'm on my own now, and I don't feel as scarce. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, you're bringing up things like that were happening in
The
your
world.
life versus previous generations, like where we were at moments like that, the 2008 crisis. I also think that there's more than that. Like having grown up with access to, you know, like the internet, I still remember when the internet came out. You probably don't remember that, or were, you know,
Probably
maybe you
like
weren't
6 or
alive.
7, but
Okay.
yeah. I remember the razors, like my mom had the razor phone and I
Yeah.
was like 8 or 9 and it was so cool.
Yeah.
But and I think there's a lot to say about my generation because they consider us growing up in this technological realm, but I did get my mom didn't get an iPhone until I was probably in middle school. So
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't the tablet child that now there is a tablet child. So
Totally.
from my generation, you know, we still had to bring action figures to the breakfasts that we would go to and all
Mm-hmm.
the family outings, you know, we didn't have a tablet in our hands. So I'm interested to see, you know, maybe what the 11 and 12-year-olds of Gen Z will
Yes.
experience. But for today's research and what we both have been like really interested in, I think there's a lot to say in the generational gap and, you know, technology. Sorry, my
Mm-hmm.
words today.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting to look at those kinds of things. And also, but going back to your point about differences in views on home ownership, this is something I kind of want to drill in more, like maybe in a future study, we can look at this, but because I phrased the survey on whether or not they felt like, I think it was 1 in 3 said that they were not sure whether homeownership would build generational wealth. And you
Right.
phrased it a little bit differently. And I'm curious to know if there's just hesitation, because the majority of the respondents in our study were, they did want to buy a home. So they still are
Oh,
wanting it, you
yeah.
know, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't necessarily that the vast majority were saying that it was because of financial reasons, or that they were confident that it would be a good investment, you know. And so I think people are feeling there's a bit of a shift happening with also, you know, the voice around what the market's doing, and our home price is going to continue to appreciate the way they have in previous generations. But there's still the value for home ownership regardless, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think something that as I've gone down this rabbit hole of interviews, you mentioned interest rates, and you and I had first cut, you were like, hey, are you seeing a negative connotation with interest rates?
Mm-hmm.
Because Lord knows we go to these MBA conferences and everyone's like, oh, the sky's falling because of rates. Gen Z, and I think your survey or your report had reflected differently. So I'm not exactly the exact number that you had wrote down, but as I was reading it, I was like, the market does seem to be impacting the larger majority, but the people that I'm talking to and having conversations with in particular,
Mm-hmm.
they understand the idea of refinancing and the idea of, hey, it could get more difficult. And if it doesn't and it gets easier, they can refinance. But if not, they may miss out on this opportunity to own a home. And also just, I think as I've talked to everyone, they love this idea of, you know, having people, all of our friends are renting. If they are renting through you, that's a win. And so I think the loan officers and the individuals who are educating on that are going to get business once they showcase numbers and, you know, really showcase the wealth, but also the idea of refinancing. Because in my conversations, people who have bought a home didn't even think about interest rates. But
Yeah.
do you remember what the statistic was around interest rates? And I have your
Oh, yeah, I'll look that up. I think one thing though, I do remember that I think it was 39% said that they were not, or that affordability was preventing them from thinking about buying a home. So I know that was
yes.
one that, or it's 30%, or no. 30% said that renting was more flexible than owning, and that was a barrier to thinking about buying a home. And then yeah, maybe it was 38% or 39%. Oh, and then here it is. 51% said high interest rates were current
Yes.
obstacles to buying a home. So I do think that is interesting, though. I've interviewed a lot of loan officers recently, and they've been talking about how educated, and this is absolutely what I've been finding too, is that Gen Z is really educated, and more first-time home buyers are coming to the table really educated. I personally think we need to find people before, like by the time they're getting there and they're super educated, that means we could have got them a lot sooner, you know, honestly. Like that means that they
Well,
prepared themselves for quite a while. You know what I mean?
And the average time that I'm seeing people research in my life who have recently bought a home is 2 years. So they're 24. They've been looking up social media, Googling, doing all of these things to have a conversation. And I know you and I have talked about this before. And you mentioned when you went through the home buying process, you were like, wait a minute, this is actually happening. Oh my gosh, this is so quick.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I think our generation is doing so much independent research. By the time we approach the conversation with a loan officer, we're expecting it to be less than a month because that's how everything in our life has been. I use the example of Amazon all the time. I go to the grocery store, they're out of my dog's dog food. I go home and I Amazon Prime it and it'll be there the next day. So it's like we have these expectations that I think our industry will slowly be innovating to meet. But that may differ from, millennials or people before that were just kind of more emotionally attached versus I think a lot of Gen Zers have been researching. They realize they need to get in now. And the last interview I did, she gave me a quote. She was like, I was so over renting. I knew exactly as soon as I saw it, I wanted to make an offer. And I just feel like when I talk to people in the industry, they're like, Gen Z is so pessimistic. And I'm like, they may come across that way right now, but really when they start researching and doing everything in the background, they're going to want to be eager to buy.
Yeah. I also think like for me, whenever I started doing the research and I was saying I ended up buying really quickly and I felt like it was too quick for me kind of. I mean, I was glad I did it, but it was because I was already totally ready. Like I already had the financial situation and, I was grounded where I was. And whereas a Gen Z person might have a little bit more time before they're even able to think about that, so that it's going to take a couple years of doing that research and also just kind of saving up money and that type of thing. So maybe place in your life might be a difference there too. But I also think that to your point earlier, like there's a lot of people, I mean, over half of Gen Z are ethnic and racial minorities. And there's historically, I mean, first time home buyers are like significantly more likely to be white. I think it's over 80%, which is wild. And if you look at, and I think, for the industry, then that means there's an opportunity in a lot of diverse markets where those conversations are less likely to have been had, where generational wealth isn't actually being passed down in a lot of cases. And so I just feel like, but I do think that we're in a place now where, and I would love your thoughts on this, of where people are able to access education in a different way through things like TikTok and, YouTube, obviously, but we're able to access that information. Whereas previously there was a barrier because you had to talk to somebody, So I think that's changing things with Gen Z.
I completely agree. And I think a lot of, you and I have talked about initiatives to like further the conversation into those communities. Like that's something I'm really passionate about. I've been so fortunate. I know that if something went wrong, my parents could help me, but not everybody has that. And that also probably develops a hesitation. And so it's really figuring out how to talk to those people about saving and what's going to qualify them, what they need to be doing now so that when they reach that stage or that life phase that they want to address it, they aren't being shocked with different ways to qualify or factors that contribute to the home buying process that maybe their parents didn't educate them on. I say our generation is so likely to go to the mall and someone say, hey, let's open a credit card real quick. It'll get you 50% off. Okay, yeah, let's do it. Nobody's told me not to. So it's like those little things that I'm so fortunate that my mom's like, Alexandra, why'd you do that? Versus people who are like, no idea. Their parents aren't educating them or helping them. But I will say social media is a great way to be starting to have those discussions, to start building that trust. And it's funny, I think I told you this, but one of the loan officers that reached out to me when I first started doing a lot of Gen Z initiatives, he was like, hey, I'm trying to reach Gen Z borrowers. I'm going to start posting TikTok, so you give me some feedback. So just to give you like a comparison, my TikToks on #GetToKnowGenZ, which is very loan officer facing, industry facing. My target audience is, our industry, and his would be a consumer who's wanting to buy a home. So my TikTok gets viewed probably 200,000 or not 200,000. 200K. No, 200 views. Sorry. I'm like trying to picture it in my head.
Yeah,
200
yeah.
views. 200 to 300 views. And then his TikToks, he's posted 5 ever, 900 plus views per video. And he's brand new to it. I don't know how old he is. He's probably mid 40s, late 40s, I don't know. But the fact that he's getting so many views, people are researching mortgage. People are researching home ownership. He's hashtagging Gen Z. People are getting this on their feed. And that just means that in the background, they're researching it independently. So they're preparing themselves silently without our industry even knowing. So the loan officers that aren't generating that content, that aren't building that relationship, I think that they could really miss out on an opportunity to be a resource for Gen Z.
Totally. And I think even if, it's having the education available for when a lead comes in, like then you're more likely to retain that lead. And, because I think a lot of people are like, well, if I start spending time on creating TikToks and then those leads are coming from places outside of my market or whatever, but like, those are really valuable outside of even just lead gen. It's valuable for your brand and all of
And
that.
sharing, like the amount of TikToks and Instagram reels that I get DM'd to me, like last week, one of my friends, she lives in Fort Lauderdale. She sent me this TikTok and it was about what annual income you had to have to qualify. And there's a lot of caveats. It was a really sticky answer, from my opinion. But this loan officer was posting, hey, if you make this amount of money, you can qualify for this, whatever. She sends it to me and she's like, oh my gosh, is this true? And me, not licensed, school mortgage banking one, I call my mom, hey, can you help me answer this for her? And my mom was like, yeah, like, so there's a lot of qualities that go into it. But also, I will say social media is a good way to build distrust too. Because if that individual who had reached out and said, hey, is this true? Whatever loan officer was posting, just kind of generic things to nurture people in. Gen Z, I think, is a lot less likely to trust. And I think you highlight that in your report. We ghost people. So like that individual, she could have reached out and say, oh my gosh, let's talk about it. I make this much money. As soon as she realizes that's not true, no response. And you probably will never get a response again.
Yes, that is so true. I'm so glad you brought up the distrust piece because you can do this and it's being done wrong, a lot and building that brand that is not trusting. So that leads me to, I want to hear from you what you think lenders aren't doing right or like where they're, missing the mark when it comes to marketing to Gen Z.
Yeah, I think that I highlight this in a lot of my videos, but the biggest thing is definitely terminology and breaking down the barriers because to the trust point, a lot of my friends, one of my recent conversations, she was like, I feel like I'll go into a conversation, I'll act really confident when they're throwing around these big terms and lingo in different industries, but I leave the conversation so negative, have such a negative connotation with the process because it was over my head. And loan officers that are out there breaking down acronyms that are addressing, maybe the elephant in the room for borrowers and, what an FHA loan is. I'm trying to think of some of the ones that she mentioned to me, but just even saying refi, that could come across misleading. Like, oh, what does that mean? Like, why are they saying refi? What does that mean? Breaking down little things because once my peer group, at least when I'm having conversations, once they feel overwhelmed or uneducated, they're a lot less likely to reiterate a conversation or even like re-engage that person in their life. And she said, I really appreciate the loan officers that would be posting, stuff that may seem overwhelming because it makes me feel a lot more trusting to bring up topics to them because they've acknowledged it may be overwhelming. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. That's such a good point. I think, one of the surveys that we did a couple years ago, we saw that 1 in 5 next gen said that they didn't feel confident in any step of the home buying process. And we asked in the survey, really specific questions because we were trying to figure out what kind of education to do. And then realized like no one knew anything. And it makes sense. I mean, why would you know? You haven't learned this stuff, but it does tell you, especially when Gen Z values authenticity so much, like authenticity plus not understanding this kind of terminology, like that makes it really important that you are not
approachable,
using
and you're not trying to be too smart because maybe previous generations, the wealth of knowledge may have came across, impressionable or
Yes.
impressive, but our generation is a lot less likely to engage with content or even have a conversation if the first initial contact is super like acronym heavy. And even like I had a conversation and I said, hey, what do you think goes into buying a home? My friend said, your employment history, which yes, but more importantly, income. There's so many factors within that go into play. But she's like, and then maybe like my dog, like if I have a dog, and I was like, your credit, like there were so many other things that went into play.
Yeah.
And I just wish that they were talked about more and they were just more I don't know, published, because also my brother last week, I had a conversation with him and he finally broke down after 20 minutes of talking and I clipped the recording, but he was like, I have no idea what a loan officer is. I'm like, mom has been in the business for 25 plus years. I am in the business.
Yeah.
It's just not something that's even talked about.
Mhm.
So talking about, or maybe rephrasing, hey, I can help you finance your home. Do you want to talk about payment? Like how you can afford a home? Just the idea of saying, hey, I'm a loan officer. Let's have a conversation. Guards up, no response. That was something
Mhm.
that I found insightful from that interview.
Yeah. And it also feels like, oh, you're going to sell me something, So,
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's so key. Is there anything else that you think lenders or loan officers or real estate agents should know about Gen Z?
Well, I think that there's so much that we could dive into, and you and I
Yeah.
need to just do a whole series in itself.
Yeah.
But one thing that I wrote down as I was looking through your research, there were so many good things, and I could have talked on for hours. But one thing that was very top of mind, I went to the pool yesterday with one of my friends, and we were in the elevator, and I was like, "Why do you rent?" We were at his apartment, and he was like, "Why do you rent?" I was like, "I'm working on it." But he was like, honestly, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. He's like, right now, like saving for the down payment, I know I need to do that. And that was insightful for me because he's participated in a lot of my surveys. And the top response for biggest obstacle was education. So if we can master the education, how do we master, the inflation and what's really glooming all over the news? I know not a lot of people check the news, but like we're on social media, we see what's happening. We realize that it's becoming more and more less likely for us to be able to save for a down payment. How does our industry address those concerns and really offer not incentives, but just a conversation about like alleviating that concern and how you can help them prepare?
Mhm.
You said 58% said that the cost of renting prevents them from considering homeownership. And my conversation yesterday, I was reading through your research and I was like, that's literally what my friend said yesterday in the elevator. So how do we as an industry, I know that's a big topic, but how do
Yeah.
we start having conversations around addressing that concern and helping them plan and also just figuring out how we can better help them live out the dream of homeownership? That individual, his rent ends in October and he's like, there's no way I can save for a down payment between now and then. He's going to get stuck in another year-long lease. And
Mhm.
that's an opportunity that maybe if 6 months ago someone had been talking to him about,
Right.
we could have been a little bit more along in the process. And that's a whole issue in itself. But I did want to highlight, I thought that was very supportive of recent conversations I've been having.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I was just talking to Clayton Collins about this podcast we listened to on the Daily, the New York Times Daily, and it was talking about how people are moving from the coastal cities into other more affordable cities
Yeah.
completely because of affordable housing options, and I think, and even some of the places, I'm assuming you were in Nashville, and yeah, some of those places are becoming really difficult to afford housing. But I think to your point, when there's education along the way, like it would have been so much easier for me to save, or for a lot of people to save, when they have an understanding of what every year is preventing them from getting, like what compound interest looks like, and what all of that, like having a better understanding of that, I think goes a
Yeah.
really long way.
Well, and I know I talked with Dave and I love everything y'all are doing at First Home IQ as well as Trust Engine, because he has this like total cost analysis
Mm-hmm.
where it showcases, the numbers to someone who is renting. And I will say, outside of social media, that's a great way to articulate value to my friends, to me personally. Seeing that, I was like, wow, that's so true. So just highlighting, the education, the finance, but also being a resource and not just wanting to push the sale, because I think a lot of it's going to be a long game. The individual I was with in the elevator, with rent and leases, you get stuck in these leases. If you're not on it now with the prospect, talk about them when their lease ends and help them get there.
Yes, I love that. Focus on personalized advice, because that's
Yeah.
what people are going to feel like then you are a resource to them. Well, thank you so much for taking some time. I do feel like I could talk to you for hours and
I
hours.
know.
How can people follow you?
Definitely connect with me on LinkedIn right now. And in the background, I'm currently kind of editing some videos for my Instagram to kind of publish and have more call to action and really my takeaways from the research that I've been doing. So LinkedIn, Ally Carty, Instagram, Ally Carty Mortgage. And then I do have a TikTok, Get to Know Gen Z. I'm really working on some content for both of my social accounts right now. But yeah, that's the best way to connect with me. And you and I need to get together and do more videos and conversations, because this, like I said, we could talk for hours.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for your help on the research, and looking forward to more collaboration. Good to see you.
100%. Bye.
Bye.